Thanks, Philip, and good morning, everyone. Good to see all of you back in MEC. I think the youths are doing okay for the parents who have your children normally seated here now in Seremban, 2 hours away from here. They're doing okay. Yeah, Philip, don't worry. Kids are okay. To make sure they are really okay, I'll go down to the youth camp afterward. I'll make sure I'll personally serve them each communion so that they will really be okay. All right, but I think they are enjoying themselves. Yesterday, there was a huge group of parents in the foyer, to send off the children. I don't know if you were one of them there. Before that, because we had a prayer meeting earlier on, had the chance to talk with some of the parents, and some of them were expressing, the worry, because for some it's the first time their children is away from the parents for such an extended period of time. So we do understand the worries, and also some of them were based on last year's experience where it was a camping trip. Yeah, it was a very safe campsite. But based on last year, people were a bit worried whether this year is a camp. Will my kids have comfortable beds? Don't worry, let me assure you, they have hot shower, they have air-conditioned rooms, right? I hope so. I haven't been there. Got mattress, yeah. Very good mattress, okay? Hot shower, air-conditioned, 4 meals a day, I heard. 4 or 5 meals a day. More than that, wow, amazing. Unlimited snacks, all right? So your kids are well-fed, well hydrated, I hope. Yeah, the weather has been quite good recently, not too hot, not too dry. So well hydrated, well fed, good beds, hot shower. I think they are fine, all right? Don't worry, they'll be back on Monday anyways, tomorrow. Pardon? No Wi-Fi though. We kept their phones. Their phones are being not say kept. I think they are not allowed to use their phones during the activity period. But after that, they can connect to the parents. But I heard line there is quite bad, because I could not connect with some of our volunteers, which we had to communicate for some important matters, and they told me, oh, line is very bad. Right, so don't worry, I'll be there this afternoon to check up on them, and I'm sure they are doing well. I'm sure the teachers there are taking good care of them. That's why a huge portion of our MEC working adult volunteers are also down there to assist, to make sure everyone is safe, all right? Also happening this weekend is the working adult camp. So the Chinese church working adults are going down for their retreat later today. I'll be joining them tomorrow after I come back from this MJYF camp. So there are a lot of retreats going on, long weekend. Keep everyone in prayer. I'm sure there are people who are traveling as well. Travel safe, drive safe, and the presence of the Lord is always with you, yeah? That's all for today. God bless you all. Now, let's go into our sermon for today. And today, I'm looking at the passage of John chapter 15, not 14, all right? I forgot to change the heading on this one. John chapter 15, verses 18 to 25. Now, this passage of scripture, Jesus mentioned the word hate, being hated many times, right? The world hates you. It hated me before it hated you. And then he talks about if they hate you, if they hate me, then he hates my Father also, right? And then he concludes in verse 25, where he says, the word that is written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause. Now, when Jesus speaks of the word hatred or being hated, he's not talking about being hated for a problem of your own, a character flaw, or a personal character trait of yours that causes you to be hated. Rather, he's talking about this thing called soft persecution, where people hate you simply for who you are. And back in Jesus' context, it's for being a follower of Jesus. So the hatred in those times there was generally two forms of hatred. Number one, the Jews hated anyone who were not Jews. The Jews' hatred towards the Gentiles, to the Samaritans, the Greeks, more so towards the Roman, which were the occupying force of that time. So there was this hatred. And then there was a secondary hatred that came up and was on the rise, especially during Jesus' time. In Jesus' time, it was the hatred for anyone who follows this man called Jesus. And then later on, after Jesus went back to heaven, it is the hatred towards this group of Jesus followers, or later on, the hatred towards the Christians, the people who profess to be followers and believers of Jesus. So Jesus was sort of, in a way, preparing his disciples for what they have already experienced to a certain extent, but he was preparing his disciples more so for what they would increasingly face in the future. Increasing hatred, and then he also speaks of persecution that will happen to them. If the world persecutes you, it has persecuted me first. So that is what Jesus is generally going on about when he talks about the hatred that the disciples will face. But then he gives them an encouragement in the midst of this very heavy message. You have to understand, right? We've been looking at the passages of John 15, 14, and 13 over the past few weeks. And all of these heavy, serious encouragements are given in a time where Jesus had just informed his disciples that he's going to die in a few hours, and there is someone among them who will betray them. And so this is already a very heavy message. Imagine you followed someone for so long, and now suddenly, in the night, this person comes to you and say, in a few hours, I'm going to be arrested. And I'm going to die, not possibly. I'm going to die. And my death is not going to be a simple process. It's going to be a very painful, brutal, cruel process, right? This is what's going to happen to me. And I'm doing this for all of you. And then Jesus goes on to say that this is all going to happen because someone among you is going to sell me out, is going to betray me. Someone among you. But it's all been prophesied, and I know about this. And it's all part of God's plan. Now you hear this as a disciple of Jesus, and it's a very heavy message to take in. And then now Jesus goes on to talk about how you are going to face persecution. The world is going to hate you in the times to come. In the midst of all this, you can imagine how heavy the hearts of the disciples must feel. And so Jesus then puts in this word of encouragement to them. He says, if the world hates you, remember, it has hated me first. Now, what does Jesus mean when he says, if the world hates you, it has hated me before it hated you? There is a very significant encouragement that Jesus was trying to give to his disciples, right? So it's a very big sentence, very big encouragement that he gives to the disciples. And as he speaks about this, in the context of persecution, what Jesus is telling the disciples is when you are persecuted in the future, don't look at this as a very foreign issue. Don't look at this as a problem that should not be happening to me. Because I am the follower of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. This should not happen to me. And Jesus was telling them, remember this, if persecution happens to you, it is because they have already persecuted me. If they hate you, it's because they hate me. Why did Jesus have to tell this? Because there was a very big misunderstanding among the disciples as to what following Jesus really means. To the disciples, up to this point even, right? Before Jesus went to the cross, the disciples had this understanding that if I follow Jesus, there is this promise that one day I will rule and reign with Jesus in Jerusalem. So they were thinking about their next political move. Right? So it's a political benefit for me to follow Jesus because Jesus is the Messiah. And so if I follow Jesus, I can one day be an official in the palace or in the city of Jerusalem. And that was their aspiration. The next thing that they thought following Jesus would bring them is special powers. Remember, there was a time where Jesus sends out the disciples. And he sends them out and they cast out demons in his name. And they perform miracles in his name. And you can find this in the Gospel of Luke, in the Gospel of Mark. And then the disciples came back to Jesus so excited, so joyous at the powers that they have. And then Jesus had to calm them down. And so they were giving a very good report to Jesus. Wow, we did all these things in your name, right? So much powers we have. Jesus, send us to more places. They were so excited, and Jesus calms them down and says, you know what? Let's go to a quiet place. Let's rest. Let's eat and let's drink. And then Jesus then gives them a very serious message. Don't rejoice in how many demons you cast out. Rather rejoice when a sinner gets saved. Because that's what the whole purpose of me sending you out is for. It's not as for a show of power. It's not to boast and brag about how much power you have, supernatural power, but rather to tell others about the saving grace of God the Father. So the disciples had this understanding that if we follow Jesus, we have powers. And if we have powers, naturally, nothing bad can happen to us, right? There's even this instance where the disciples, upon having a misunderstanding in a particular village, the villagers turned them away, right? And so they go up to Jesus and says, Jesus, can we get your permission to call down fire from heaven to destroy this village? You see the misunderstanding that was going on in the disciples' minds, thinking to themselves, this is whom we are following, a great man of power. And if we are with him, nothing can come against us. And so Jesus, at this point, he has to remind them that disciple, being my disciple, is not all about power. It's not about having a smooth life. It's not having a life where you get to the top of everything else, but rather being a disciple is a sacrifice, because the world hated me. The world persecutes me. The world does not receive me. And if you want to be my disciple, that's what's going to happen to you. It's a sacrifice, not a position of privilege. So don't think persecution is a foreign issue. It should not happen to me. The next thing about persecution is when Jesus says, if the world persecutes you or if the world hates you, it has hated me. He's also reminding his disciples, you are not alone in your troubles. If the world hates you, don't think that, because you are a human on this earth, that's why you can be persecuted. Remember, I was persecuted. I was hated as well. And Jesus understands the whole concept of persecution, because even during his earthly ministry, all throughout his earthly ministry, people wanted to kill him. People hated him for speaking the truth. People hated him for announcing that he was the Messiah, the Son of God, here to save them from the sins, not from the Roman government. And they hated him for that. You see, the Jews generally did not hate Jesus for who he was. Right? Because you must understand, there were many people during that time that came and talked about being the Messiah and led even revolutions against the Roman emperor, against the Roman soldiers, but failed miserably because they were not the one. But here comes Jesus announcing that he was the Messiah, performing miracles, and then suddenly the Jews took notice of Jesus. He might really be the one. But then when Jesus came and says, I come here to save the world from her sins, they were upset. We don't want you to do that, Jesus. We want you to save us from the present problem, the Romans. And so Jesus understands what it means to be hated. And so he tells his disciples, if the world hates you, remember this, you are not alone. I know how you're feeling. I am there with you. And I am journeying with you. And I understand what you're feeling the best, because I have gone through persecution myself. Jesus understands the persecuted. That was the message he was trying to bring across. Today we don't face persecution, right? And sometimes people always like to ask this question, if persecution does hit us, will we stand firm in our faith or will we give up on Jesus? Let me tell you the truth. It is easier to be faithful in the midst of heavy persecution, but it's really hard to be faithful when we face the trials and the challenges of life. Think about this for a moment. Persecution is a very direct attack on your faith. If you're a Christian, we take away your benefits, we take away your comfort, or at worst, you become a martyr for your faith. And sometimes people who live in persecuted areas find it even easier to hold on to their faith in times of persecution. But then we don't face persecution we face hardships in life. The daily struggles, challenges, whether it's economical, relationships, or personal struggles with life. And sometimes, while these are not equivalent to persecution, but it is almost like persecution. It is a form of hardship. And sometimes it is these hardships that take people away from a relationship with God the fastest compared to persecution. And so that's why when we face hardships, this verse is very applicable for our Malaysian context. We don't have persecutions, but we face hardships in our everyday life. All of us. And so when we face hardships, what is the mindset that we should have? How can we encourage ourselves to continue to remain in a relationship with God? Remember, first thing, don't look at it as an anomaly. It should not happen to me. I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a good Christian. This thing should not happen to me. This trouble should not hit my life. I should not be in a challenging situation. No, don't think of it like that. Don't think that because I am a Christian, my life should be smooth sailing. Rather, look at it as part of the pattern of life. In life, there are ups and there are downs. And there's nowhere in the Bible that informs us life is going to be smooth sailing. Psalm 23, the psalm that everyone knows, even talks about mountaintop experiences and valley experiences. Psalm 91 speaks of wild beasts that will attack. You know, the viper that will bite at your heel. But yet God is in control of it all. Right? But that doesn't mean that God removes the viper or removes the beast or removes the periods where you go through the valley. God allows it to be there because it is part of the patterns of life. Ups and downs, good and bad. But through it all, the powerful reminder from God is you are not alone. God knows what you're going through. God knows what you're feeling. And He, most importantly, is there with you through it all. So we can draw from this passage of Scripture to encourage us, even in our most difficult of times. God is still with me. If you can't think of anything else, if you can't hold on to anything else, remember this. God is still with you. You are not alone. I think that's a very powerful reminder that will keep you on the right path in the midst of troubles, that will keep you in a relationship with God at all times. Next thing about persecution that Jesus was bringing across to his followers is to zoom out. Zoom out of the issue. Zoom out of the problem that you're facing, right? You see, go to verse 21 and 23. In verse 21, Jesus says, "But on all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know Him who sent me." What is Jesus trying to say to his disciples when he tells them this? On all these things that they do to you, on account of my name, because they do not know the one who has sent me. Jesus is telling them, when you face persecution, don't blame yourself. You are not the problem. They are doing these things to you on account of me. Jesus speaking to himself, because they do not really know God who has sent me. Right? So, in other words, Jesus is telling his disciples, persecution is not a product of your own actions, but rather the fruits of those who reject God and those who do not know God. So don't blame yourself. Zoom out. Don't look at myself as the problem. Is it a particular sin that I have done? Is it a particular action that I have not done right? And so maybe it is me who is the problem. Jesus is saying, no, you are not the problem. They are the ones who do not know God. And in their own process of not knowing God, they persecute you. Right? The next thing that Jesus tells them about zooming out is, whoever hates me hates my Father also. And so Jesus is telling his disciples to remember this, that persecution is not ordained by God. Persecution is not ordained by God. Whoever hates me hates God the Father. And so because of their hatred, they do these things to you. They persecute you. God did not arrange for persecution to happen, but rather it is humans' action, human rejection towards God that brings about persecution in your life. While it can happen, but it is not God who created persecution for your life. It is not God who ordained this difficult and terrible path for you to go so that your life will end in this way. No. Remember this. It is a pattern of life. It is a pattern of life with its weaknesses, with its flaws, and especially with evil present in this world. Persecution is bound to happen. Hardships are bound to happen. But at the end of it, God will vindicate the persecuted. At the end of it all, God will help the persecuted. And this is an encouragement that Jesus gives to his disciples so that they can have this beautiful reminder, this powerful reminder that while I am facing persecution, don't think that it is a gift, quote unquote, from God for my life, for choosing this path. God wants to test me. God wants to build up my faith. God needs to make me stronger, and so he gives me persecution. He arranges persecution to happen in my life. No. Jesus tells his disciples, in the midst of persecution, don't blame God. Don't think that it is God who brought troubles into your life. And don't blame God, and remember this, God will bring you out of your troubles. God will bring you out of this moment of persecution. When facing persecution, when facing hardships in our own life, I think it's very important to zoom out. It's so important to zoom out, right? I don't like those kind of mirrors. You know, in my house, there are two kinds of mirrors in our dresser. There's one that is a magnified mirror, right? So you put your face in front of it, you see a bigger version of yourself. You see the pores, you see the whatever pimple marks on your face or whatever. It really magnifies all the flaws on your face, and you're like, wow, I want to look at the other mirror where it's not magnified. Wow, I look good here, right? I don't see the wrinkles, I don't see anything, right? Sometimes when we are in hardships, it's about zooming out. Don't zoom in so much on the problem and then look at yourself and say, maybe I'm to be blamed for this. You see, the number one reason for being very discouraged during hardships is when you zoom in and then you start looking at yourself. And you start thinking, maybe I have certain sins. Maybe I've not done something right. Maybe it's because yesterday I said this word wrong, and so today this thing happens to me. It's a consequence of what I did yesterday. Is God punishing me? Is God judging me? I think this is a very bad and dangerous cycle to get into, especially when you're in trouble. You face some trouble at your workplace, and then you look at yourself, oh, maybe it's because of me. I'm the problem. Well, occasionally, at times, it might be your problem, right? But most of the times, it is just the patterns of life. Life has its ups. Life has its downs. Don't blame yourself. Don't look at yourself and say, I am the problem, I'm the issue, and then beat yourself up over it, get so discouraged, and in the process of being discouraged, you're giving in to the lies of the devil, and then the devil then takes you slowly further and further away from the truth of God, to a point where you zoom in so much so that you no longer see God in your life. You no longer are able to see God at all with you in your hardship. So don't blame yourself. The devil loves to get people into this whole cycle of blaming yourself. You are the problem. You are the problem. And if you can just get rid of yourself, problems will end. And that's what leads to bigger problems actually sometimes. It affects your emotional health. It affects your mental health. Don't give in to the devil, who likes you to play the blame game, and oftentimes it's blaming yourself. Don't blame God either. So some people go on the other extreme. They don't blame themselves for anything, but then they go straight to God. Any problem I have, it is because of God. Any good thing that happens in my life is because of me. I trust in my own wisdom, I trust in my own strength, great things happen. But the moment I start to trust in God, bad things happen to me. God takes me on this roller coaster journey of faith that I don't like. And we blame God for everything. Don't blame God as well. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame God. God never ordains your life to be a life of problem, to be a life full of hardships. That is one thing I'm very sure of. God has never ordained your life or predestined your life to be a life of a problematic life, to be a problematic life right from the day you were born. He has never predestined you for that. But rather, we live in a broken world. We live in a world where evil and good coexist. And when evil and good coexist, naturally, there will be good, there will be bad. But remember, through it all, if we can stop blaming God, if we can stop blaming ourselves, if we can continue to look to God, we will see that through everything that happens in my life, God is still with me. And I think that is more important. God is still with me, regardless of what happens to me. God is still with me, regardless if I'm healthy or I'm sick. God is with me. God is with me, regardless if I'm rich or poor. God is with me, whether I'm in a good relationship or in a bad relationship. God is still with me. Zoom out. Look up towards God. Don't keep looking down at your problem. Don't keep zooming and magnifying your problem. Don't keep blaming yourself or blaming God, because these are things that will take you away from God, not draw you closer to God. Zoom out. Look to God. And you'll begin to put things in its right perspective, especially during troubling times. This is a very beautiful reminder. Simple reminder. And I hope it gives you a form of encouragement this morning. God is with you at all times. Let us all pray.